Chapter 4, The American Revolution. Section 1, The Revolution Begins. For many colonists, the closing of Boston Harbor was the last straw, the last slap in the face, if you will. So, a group of colonists, call themselves the First Continental Congress, will meet in Philadelphia. 12 of the 13 colonies will send delegates to this meeting in Philadelphia, the exception being Georgia. And during this meeting, they decided to halt trade with Great Britain and to alert the colonial militia to prepare for war. That was not the goal at first, was to go to war, but they wanted to have the militia prepared just in case. And in this meeting, independence was not the top priority. Though there were some who wanted independence, the group as a whole did not seek independence. Though the delegates at the First Continental Congress debated whether to seek independence or not, they did compromise and draft something called the Declaration of Rights that included the ideas of life, liberty, and property. Basically, these were 10 resolutions that they wanted to present to King George III. Now, colonists who wanted to fight for independence from Britain were called patriots. Now, let me give you an example of a patriot. His name is Patrick Henry. He is from the colony of Virginia. And in order to encourage the patriots in Virginia to support the Declaration of Rights, he gave these famous words. "They tell us, sir, that we are weak, unable to cope with so formidable an adversary. But when will we be stronger? Gentlemen may cry, peace, peace, but there is no peace. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death." Now, if you remember with the Intolerable Acts, one of the portions of that act was to appoint a British general named Thomas Gage as the new Massachusetts governor. Now, he had heard that colonists were starting to gather up weapons and storing them in the city of Concord, which is outside of Boston. So he will send troops to Concord to go seize those weapons. When a man named Paul Revere finds out about this, he and 2 others will go to warn the local militia, who are known as the Minutemen, to ready for battle. Paul Revere will enlist the aid of a man named Robert Newman, who was to climb into the steeple of the Old North Church and watch for the British soldiers. And if they would advance across land, Newman was supposed to display 1 lantern from the steeple. If they rode across the Charles River, Newman then would place 2 lanterns in the window. So when Paul Revere and another man named William Dawes saw the 2 lights shine, they would set off on horseback. And they would use 2 different routes to go alert the Minutemen. Now you can look at this map just to kind of see the path that Paul Revere took. Here's Boston, and he rode across the countryside to get to Concord. Now, at one point, he does get captured by the British, so he doesn't quite make it, but the point is here he is yelling as he's riding, "The Redcoats are coming! The Redcoats are coming!" On April 19, 1775, British troops arrive in Lexington. Lexington is a small town just outside of Concord, and they will meet up with about 70 armed Minutemen. And the commander, or the captain of the Patriots waiting there, yelled at his troops, "Do not fire until fired upon." So you have the British on one side and the colonists on the other side, and they have their weapons aimed at each other. Then all of a sudden a shot rings out. And to this day, we don't really know who fired this first shot, but this shot became known as the shot heard round the world. The British Redcoats will defeat the Minutemen in Lexington, push them back, and will move on to Concord. But once they get to Concord, the Minutemen who were there will force the British to retreat back to Boston. So it was a huge stand for the Patriots. After the fighting at Lexington and Concord, the colonists will send more delegates to another meeting in Philadelphia called the Second Continental Congress. And it was also to address the fact that King George III had not addressed the Declaration of Rights like they had hoped. So during this Second Continental Congress, it was still some debate as to whether they should actually go to war for independence or try to negotiate with the king. But this Second Continental Congress was really the first attempt at a Republican government in the colonies. Anyway, the debate continued, and the colonists will compromise, and they will first create an army, but they will also send King George III an olive branch petition. This petition was basically a final attempt to restore harmony between the king and the colonies. Anyway, this Continental Congress, Second Continental Congress, will create the Continental Army, and it will be commanded by a Virginian who had fought in the French and Indian War. His name is George Washington. So while the Continental Congress is debating peace, the Massachusetts militia begins fighting. Now, they need supplies because they're desperate for supplies. So, Patriot Benedict Arnold will lead an attack on a British fort in New York called Fort Ticonderoga. And on May 10th, 1775, they will seize the fort and all the weapons that were found in that fort. Now, at the same time, colonial forces are fortifying some hills that kind of surround Boston. One of them is called Breed's Hill, and another one's called Bunker Hill. And the whole goal here is to prevent the British from escaping from Boston. Now, of course, the British will see the colonists up on the hills, and they will start their attack. So 2,400 redcoats are going to fight 1,600 Americans at what became known as the Battle of Bunker Hill. Now, the Americans are on top of the hill. And if we know anything about warfare, having the high advantage is better than not. You want to be on the top, firing down on your enemy, as opposed to running up the hill trying to attack your enemy. So the redcoats will charge up the mountain, and the Americans will make them go back down. So that was one attempt. The British will take a second attempt up the hill, and they'll be defeated, and they'll go back down the hill. But this time, on the third attempt, the British will make it all the way up the hill, and they will force the Americans to retreat. But that's only after the Americans had or killed 1,000 British soldiers. So this was a moral victory, the Battle of Bunker Hill. Even though they didn't really win, it was a moral victory. George Washington is going to arrive in Boston around this time, and he's going to bring all the cannons and weapons that were taken from Fort Ticonderoga, and he's going to situate himself on another hill around Boston called Dorchester Heights. This was in March of 1776. So he positioned the cannons from Dorchester Heights and on a hill called Nook's Hill, with the cannons aimed at the British down in Boston. And that was enough for the British to retreat. All they had to do was see those cannons, and they were out of there. That's the end of Section 1.